Right, councillors, we're up to item 8 of our order of business, and this is around the review of the Palmerston North sections of the Manawatu Whanganui Regional Sport Facility Plan, specifically around our LTP program 1916. So I'll invite Anne-Marie and Julie up to speak to that. It's page 231 of our papers, councillors. Julie.
Tēnā koutou, councillors. Very happy to bring this piece of work back to you today. So this is the review of the Palmerston North sections of the RSFP, as we will call it, the Regional Sport Facility Plan. I'd just like to point out the diagram on page 232, which explains how this piece of work, which is remaining in draft form at this point, fits within the wider review, and I'll hand over to Anne-Marie Mori to make some more comments. Thank you.
Kia ora koutou, Mayor and councillors. I'd just like to touch on a couple of things. This review came about following the consultation process on the LTP, and some of you will recall we had a very high number of submissions and requests for sports facilities through that process. The Regional Sports Facility Plan has provided a structure for council and also for Sport Manawatu that oversees the plan's implementation, and the key role it plays is to manage facility requests that are coming from the community to test whether there is evidence of need or demand, and then if the proposal is feasible. Once this research is undertaken, then it can be used to advise council on whether or not it should consider making a financial contribution to that project, noting, of course, that some of the sports facilities require a significant investment from council, both for the building and for the ongoing operational costs. So it is something that it needs to be taken seriously. So the review has given us the opportunity to update the work that was done in 2018. And I suppose most significantly, it has given a greater consideration to community needs. So what we have ended up with is really like a recreation needs assessment, which council has done itself previously. Just a note about the 2018 Regional Sports Facility Plan, it very much focused on what we have, which is, it was a big stock take across the region. And some of the recommendations made from that plan were quite general and often pointed to there needing to be more research. The overall theme from that plan that there were plenty of facilities, but they needed to be optimised. What that means is that they needed to make sure that they were meeting the greatest need and function more as a regional network. Trying to work out what need is quite challenging, and you'll see through the review that has involved gathering feedback from facility users, from stakeholders, partners and managers, demographic analysis, looking at membership and participation trends, and also looking at general trends that are impacting on the delivery of sport and recreation. Also, you might notice that there has been some assessment against some national benchmarks in the review, which again provide a tool to guide to see whether we have enough of particular facilities, if there and points to potential need for more. So the research has, I suppose, helped in terms of deciding priority actions for council. And to take these into other processes and projects that are already underway. Of key interest will be the recommended approaches for facility development and the actions considered to be high priority, which have been outlined in the report. Another key approach that the research has provided council which is outlined in our report in section 3, is that council should strive to foster partnerships with other providers and optimise the use of all existing facilities before developing new assets. And this latter part of that is a very similar recommendation that was included in the recent Community Places Stocktake and Needs Assessment. So just wanted to emphasise that there was also through that piece of work a recommendation around maximising use of current facilities to meet needs of the community. In summary, I think the review has provided council with a better direction for sports facility planning for the city than what was in the initial 2018 plan, and staff are already using this research to feed into projects such as the review of the arena master plan and to scope further work that is planned to start soon on aquatic facilities. So we're happy to take any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you, Julie. Thanks, Anne-Marie. Look, I reckon it's probably highlighted a few things. It'd be fair to say that it's pulled out a couple of things that were perhaps assumptions before, like the need for aquatic, multi-use indoor, where the bowls, where the artificial turf sort of fits in. Would that be fair to say? It's pulled that out?
Oh, definitely. Some of those projects, I say, that we have been working on, I suppose it has brought them into the spotlight a little bit more, and the work that has been done has, confirmed that I think we're on the right direction of travel and investigating some of those proposals.
And just another question. Page 351 looked like an NZTA approval model. Which one are we working to? That one, or are we working to the rather more streamlined one on page 233, which really just has the very clear boxes of where we get to?
Yeah, the diagram in the appendix is taken straight from the 2018 Regional Sports Facility Plan.
Doesn't mean to say we need to follow it, though, does it?
Well, we are following it. It's complex, and so the diagram in the officer's report is really just a simplification of those key sort of work stages.
Why don't we simplify it then? That's my question to you.
We're not simplifying it in terms of the work involved. We're simplifying it just so that it's less complicated than the quite complicated process in the Regional Sports Facility Plan. We're still undertaking those steps.
You probably answered my question yourself, but why would we have a big plan, a big flow chart that takes up a whole page, and yet we've got quite a simple one on page 233?
I can probably add to that. Mr Mayor, I think the one we've put into the report is really just a simplification to describe an overview of the process, which is absolutely what is being followed. I think the slightly more complicated diagram in the appendix is probably more a technical piece of work that's going to be looked at by technicians, and so the councillors, I think the blue one with the 8 boxes is probably the one you need to look at. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Hapeta.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Thank you, Julie and Anne-Marie. I've got a couple of questions. Are we allowed to ask questions on attachment 1? Is that your report?
Sorry. No, it's not my report. It's the report that was prepared by the consultant team that have done the research, but I'm happy to try and answer any questions that you may have.
Great. Okay, thank you. So I'm on page 259, which talks about emerging sporting trends, or actually micro trends in sport. So there's a few things in there, hubbing multi-use. So hubbing multi-use, do you think we do that anyway with our sporting facilities?
Yes, certainly we've got some great examples of where we have multi-use hubs. There's a number of them around the city. Arena Manawatu is probably our key multi-hub facility, but there are others like Vortia, Scogland Park, Ongley, Manawaroa Park, and the Massey facilities as well.
But probably what this report's telling you is that we don't have enough of it with our usage. Is that because that's the problem, is because we've got gym sport that wants to use it as well at the same time, and that's the problem. We've got too many codes that are wanting to use it all at the same time. Would that be one of the issues?
I think it's more about recognising that there's, synergies of facilities that, do work well together. And yes, we do have demands from other groups wanting to, I suppose, be co-located with existing facilities in our hubs. But I suppose, my observation would be that we, although we have these hubs, we don't really identify them as such, as strongly, perhaps as in other places. So they have been created, and I know in the past there have been plans to be more deliberate about the creation of hubs. But it is just a more efficient way of clustering facilities and potentially administration of sports together in one location.
Okay. This is second question under the next page over, which is under page 261. It's got a number of groups listed: women and girls, tamariki, other disadvantaged groups, Māori, and it doesn't have Pacifica listed. Would that be another group that we would be looking at as well, because that's a big part of our community?
Potentially at a localised in a localised situation. This is really just pointing to the priorities that Sport New Zealand have in their strategic direction. So, there could be other groups, and I suppose as a council we probably take a much broader lens in terms of trying to meet the needs of all of the community, not just specific groups. But Sport New Zealand are obviously targeting their efforts into particular groups.
Thank you. Thank you for your answers.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thanks, Julie and Anne-Marie. Couple questions stemming from page 235 of the agenda. So the top of page 235 talks about city-specific criteria, and I just wanted to know if the plan contains any guidance on what weighting would go on city-specific criteria relative to regional criteria.
Good question. That hasn't been worked through. Some of those criteria were developed following the elected members workshop that was had earlier in the year. But yes, they would sit alongside of the criteria that are in the decision-making process framework, the complicated one. So at each process step, the intention is that the whatever piece of work has been delivered would be tested against both the criteria in the Regional Sports Facility Plan and these criteria that have been identified through this piece of work, a Palmerston North bespoke criteria that would assist in the decision-making whether or not a proposal should then proceed to the next process stage.
Thank you. So when this comes to us, hopefully finally in 2023, I understand, will there be some clarity around the relative weighting? And I suppose the reason I'm asking the question is it seems like if we don't actually address that, we kind of still have a plan that has an elephant standing in the corner.
Well, yeah, potentially. Hadn't really thought of it right now, but as the review of the rest of the plan is being looked at, and that includes the investment decision-making process and those criteria, and since we've had this piece of work done, there will need to be some thought go into that question around when we're receiving proposals from the community, how much weight we do place on the regional criteria versus our own special criteria that are there to assist us trying to make good decisions on which facility projects should proceed or not.
Thank you. The other question relates to the same area, and it's just so I can understand what the words actually mean. 2A talks about opportunities to participate, and 2C talks about engagement. What is participation versus engagement when we're talking about sports?
Probably not a lot, to be fair. When I look at those words, I think opportunities are the, we have a priority but to be one of the most active communities in our strategic direction. So it is about, I suppose, recognising that we're providing for that. I suppose engagement is a broader conversation with the community about how we achieve that.
If I can just add something, it's something we can certainly follow up with RSL, but my read of it is it's to do with the lack of a comma, and so it's to do with the inequalities is the important word in A. So A is about addressing inequalities and access and opportunities, and C is about engagement overall. But we can clarify to make sure that that is right, and perhaps clarify some wording if I had to read it 3 times to work that out.
Right, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thanks, Anne-Marie and Julie. Just a question that was out of 3A, recommended sports facility planning approaches, which you referred to in your summary there, Anne-Marie, because I too picked up that echo of the community facilities. And I see that links into 4B, maybe, in next steps, but I really just wanted to seek input or your understanding of how we're going to do that matching piece of work that seems to be required to optimise the use of existing facilities.
I think as we have these 2 pieces of work now completed, that it's definitely something that we're turning our minds to, how we connect these pieces of work. So I don't have an answer right now, but we are conscious of trying, because the community spaces work did include some analysis of sports facilities within that, and as I identified, there are some similarities regarding, the word optimisation and recognising that the community doesn't necessarily have access to all facilities, that we might consider that, that might have been considered that they do have. So, it's a work in progress. So I'm not sure if Julie wants to add anything there.
I do. Through you, Mr. Mayor, I think the magic words refer to the 10-year plan. I think there are going to need to be some really detailed and important conversations amongst councillors about how these 2 major research pieces, how decisions are made about them, and then the programs that flow on from them. There's some great information now that we can use to inform all that planning, and so next year is really when that detailed work is going to need to come.
I suppose a follow-up question to that would be, I think I still see a gap in the information that we have, which is about community understanding of the opportunities that are available in both spaces. So is there a plan for that piece of work, or do you feel like we have that information?
Off the top of my head, I would think that would be one of the things that could be considered in terms of council's own actions. If for instance, in reviewing this work, staff and elected members consider that one of the main issues is that people don't know, what there is and what opportunities there are, or that those opportunities need to be optimised, use that language, or tweaked or whatever, I think probably that would be part of the action plan that would come out. That's just off the top of my head. Yeah, did you want to?
So when do we have that conversation?
10-year plan workshops.
10-year plan workshops. Okay, great. Thank you.
Online, Councillor Hancock.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor, and look, thank you very much for the report. I've just got a very quick question, and it just relates to page 234 under multi-use indoor venues in the table there. Under one of the bullet points there, it says PNCC policy settings in relation to community use and access to the CET arena indoor courts. Is there an inference there that perhaps we need to do some work now with our policy is it too restrictive? Are we in an underuse situation?
Probably quite the opposite. I think we're in a situation where the community is expressing some frustration about consistent access to some of the indoor court space at Arena. So yes, I think it's a gnarly question in terms of the management of the Arena indoor facilities, in terms of the constant juggle that needs to go on in a multi-purpose venue.
Great, thanks, Emery.
Just
That's
to
very
add-
helpful, and that provides these specifics. Thank you.
Just to add, if I might, Councillor Hancock, through the Mayor, that probably specifically relates to financial policy settings as much as anything, because how Arena responds in its service delivery is dictated to some extent by the financial policy settings that Council sets for that venue.
Great, that's even clearer. Thank you.
Councillor Arnott.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I noticed in the list of city facilities that College Street Normal School is left off the list. Just on another note, the Normal basically means it's a teaching school, just like Pinnins, for student teachers. They have a 25-metre pool, and they also have a gymnasium/community centre, which is probably the newest one in the city. Any reason why that's not on the list?
No particular reason. I suppose as the document remains in draft, there's an opportunity to pick up any gaps, and yeah, that will be a gap that we can follow up on.
Lovely, thank you.
All right. Thank you. Sorry. Councillor Isabellan.
Sorry, just one last one from me. I'm just referring to, where are we, page 235. At 2D, looking at the additional city-specific criteria for the investment decision-making process. And I just was curious about the criteria specifying future growth potential for existing activities or newer codes, and if in your view there was any flow-on effect to sporting codes that are maybe stable or smaller, aren't necessarily, could there be a potential where you have long-standing groups that are missing out on being eligible for investment due to not being identified as potential growth area?
Yes, Councillor, that's a good point, because we do, through this research, we have identified some groups that feel that they are constrained to grow or to provide different offerings because of the issues with access to facilities.
Sorry, juggling. You're fine? Okay. Right. No further questions. Thank you, Julie. Thank you, Anne-Marie, and appreciate the report and the background work that the consultants have done. Right, we have a couple of resolutions there, and I think there's a couple of additional ones to come as well. So this is around the review of the Palmerston sections of the 2018 Manawatu Whanganui Regional Sport Facility Plan, LTP Program 1916, and around one resolving that Council note the review of the Palmerston sections of the 2018 Manawatu Whanganui Regional Sport Facility Plan, Attachment 1, will be finalised and brought back to Council as part of the review of the whole Regional Sport Facility Plan in 2023. Number 2, that Council note that the planning approaches and recommendations in Attachment 1 will inform advice on sports facilities decision making. I'm quite happy to move those, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. Just one moment. We've also got a couple of additional recommendations from Councillor Meehan, but we'll go through the substantive We'll go through these two first. So look, councillors, before I open it up for comments, thank you to the officers again, and also Sport and acknowledge you, Brad, from Sport 102 being here. I think it's great that the review's actually highlighted some stuff that our community has been telling us for some time. the four main areas that our community submitted on in the last LTP and actually the last annual plan, and they've become top of mind with this report and review. It was around our aquatic plan, our multi-use indoor facilities, the joint bowling facility and the artificial turf. And I think councillors will be finding that in their engagement around the community. I certainly get stopped about aquatic, I can tell you that now. Just want to make a note, and I think it's good that we have, and it's always important to have a decision-making process, but I do have to say I looked at page 351 and I immediately thought of NZTA and that model, and we've seen how that model has really driven less investment rather than more investment. So, and arguably, is the decision-making process good? So I looked at the top of page 233 and I got told with officers actually the same thing. I would favour something that's a bit more simplified. I'm a person of that's a bit more perhaps pragmatic in nature and like to get things done. And I think if you look at sporting and community facilities, they're essentially about people. And for, residents use them, visitors use them, and sometimes they're needed and required, where sometimes policy and maybe even the odd initial feasibility study doesn't always stack up. And I can give you some examples. If you look at the Lido Aquatic Centre when that was built 50 plus years ago, it was built into the future. And the council of the day invested quite heavily in that. And it stood us in pretty good stead up until about now, or around about now. And if you look at places like Calhoun Park, and then in a sport-owned perspective squash gym, they would never have been built if we'd done the policy thing. Yet it was, as Mark Sorensen, the Black Sox coach, said to me the other day when he was in Palmerston North, this is like coming to the Field of Dreams. Build it and they'll come. So I do take some of the process. It's important, but we can't get too hung up on things at times. A lot of stuff that comes into this too, which hasn't really been mentioned, is where regional sports organisations come into it, where clubs come into it, and the volunteer administrators. There's the reasons we've got the basketball and the volleyball here. It's because of the great volunteer network and administration network in behind it. And that's really important. I mean, the stocktake of the city's facilities have been really good. I acknowledge the hub aspect as well. I think we do have some hubs. They're not perhaps well defined. We overlook Fitzherbert Park and what that does in terms of cricket, hockey next door, and actually Ongley Park and the many playing grounds there. Also Massey, lucky to have, and the New Zealand Defence Force at Linton with multiple grounds. But we do have, for this city, we're really well endowed with some great facilities internationally. Arena in the indoors side, Calhoun Park, Fitzherbert Park and Massey with hockey. I look at the Esplanade, even the croquet grounds, Manawatu Golf Course, all hosted international events in the last short while. Many national facilities, which are multiple, are owned by the council and regional facilities. So it's really good. But I think finally, it's great to identify some of those projects that our communities have been asking for some time, and pretty well in most cases are prepared to partner up with us in some form of funding too. So I look forward to getting something across the line that puts some of that in place. I think we've been doing a lot of talking, and I know some of our sports are saying, well, what are we going to do? So rolling on with this full review and ultimately plan will be great. All right, councillors wishing to speak. Councillor Naylor.
Thanks. Just a brief comment. I think it's been really good to have this review. I probably do have a slightly different view that the Mayor has just shared in terms of that framework that is detailed. That does, yes, it's complex, but I think we need to remind ourselves why we asked for this work, and that was the reality is the community were asking us to deliver on more than what we can actually realistically deliver in terms of cost. And so we do need to have a framework to be able to prioritise and identify a pathway to determine what we're going to do. If we make those decisions based on who has the biggest lobby group, who is the loudest, who writes the most submissions, then that's probably not going to be the fairest way that we can make decisions about what things will get across the line and which things won't get across the line. I certainly will be keen to see some things get across the line, but I also think we need to be realistic in saying that not everything that the community wants will be realistic to get across the line. So we do need a framework, even though sometimes that can look a little bit complex. There are those points where you have to, potentially with some programs that we would have to stop and say, no, this isn't realistic or this isn't feasible. So yeah, that is the reality that we are faced with. But I do think this report provides us with a good framework to be able to do that. Yeah.
Okay, there being no further comments, we'll vote on the two resolutions we have up here now. Thank you. That is passed, 15 votes for, none against. Thank you. Council, we're just getting the other two recommendations up, and then they can be debated. All right, councillors, we've got a couple of extra resolutions there, and I'll get the councillor to speak to them, but I'll just read them out for those online. Number 3, that council progress an aquatic facilities business case in the long-term plan, 2023 to 2034, and that the council progress a multi-use indoor facility business case in the long-term plan, 2023 to 2034. Councillor Meehan, do you want to speak to those?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I think it's pretty straightforward. I don't think a lot needs to be said. Anybody that's been on this council the last term especially, and we can go back a few terms, aquatics have hit us up regularly, and so have indoor sports. A few councillors attended Freiburg Pools a few weeks back, and I think every one of us got pretty well accosted. And we understand there is a need in this city. We've waited for this work to come through for 3 years plus, and it tells us exactly what we already knew, that it highlights and prioritises what we need. And I think this is pretty simple. It just gets it in the long-term plan, gets it underway, and gets us started. There's no doubt as to why we can't discuss it more at the long-term plan stage, but I think this just gets the process underway. Thank you.
Councillor Harpiter.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Basically, just to follow on from Councillor Meehan, this is around putting some costing around an aquatic facility in the first instance in recommendation 3, and then putting a costing around recommendation 4. With recommendation 3, we know there's a need, so we don't need to do a needs assessment because we do know there's a need for this. We have had a lot of people tell us this, but we also know there's a need in our community with different modes of, like we've got canoe polo, we've got swimming, and we've also got other kinds of swimming in the pool. So we do know that there is definitely a need for it. We have got so many different codes that need to use the pool all the time, and we don't have enough space in the pool. So there's definitely a need for the pool. With the indoor space or the multi-use space, we've also got a need. We have got, I know we do need to change our policy settings for arena, but it's another discussion for another day. We do have a lot of need for the multi-use, and that is another, we don't need to do a needs assessment to know that. We've also got this document that tells us this as well. We've been waiting this for 4 years actually, so we actually now have got the document to tell us that we need it. We now just need a business case to tell us how much it's going to cost. This is not telling us, Councillor Naylor, that we have to pay for it all. This is telling us, Councillor Naylor, that basically this is how much it's going to cost us. And that's all we want to know, is how much both of these facilities are going to cost, and then we need to go out and try and find partners for it. And that's what this is about. So that's what we want to do, is get a business case for both of them so we know exactly how much that's going to cost us going forward. Thank you.
Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I have a question, which I think is a process question, so probably through you to the CE. Just the wording of this seems a bit unusual to me, and normally we would refer something to the long-term plan for deliberation as part of that process. Would that be the process that we should be engaging in here? Is that what this means, or do we need to change the words to fit the process?
Yes, through the Mayor, yes, you're correct, because what would happen is that you would effectively what these resolutions are doing is actually potentially prioritising these in the LTP immediately. So I'll check with the mover and seconder if that is actually what they're attempting to do here, because it would line up alongside other projects in the LTP, I would suggest.
You're not seeking to prioritise it. So would we be open to changing the wording, say refer this to the long-term plan process? Thank you. I'll be much more comfortable with that. So to comment, if I could, I absolutely accept the case that's been put forward by former chairs of sport who know what they're talking about in these regards. And absolutely, we all hear those comments around the community about our aquatic facilities and that multi-use indoor sport. There is no question that this is the space that we need to be exploring further. And I would, in principle, support us moving to that business case state. But, reflecting on the conversations we've had earlier today about the space we're moving into in this long-term plan, well, there will be some decisions and some difficult decisions to be made about what we prioritise going forward. I think these two pieces of work should take their place in that discussion, so I'd support it on that basis.
Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. I am much more comfortable with the wording. I was going to also suggest a slight change because I don't think it's appropriate at this point to progress something. I think it's appropriate to refer that for our consideration in the long-term plan process. And that would be more in line with the way we should do things without predetermining what that long-term plan process what the outcome of that will be. So I'm very happy to support this with the adjusted wording.
Online, Councillor Hancock.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. Look, I was just about to put my hand down, but I had the same concerns as Councillor Bowen, just in terms of how that was worded. And as Councillor Naylor has pointed out, I'm actually quite happy to support this because it just puts it in the queue along with everything else, but it does highlight it. So those are my comments. Thank you.
Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I really, as a question, if I could, in the first, because I'm referring to page 233 in the report, it outlines our investment decision-making process, and it would seem to me a business case is several steps down that path, and wondered whether that was the correct terminology to the mover and seconder, whether it's a detailed feasibility assessment and bringing it back up the chain a little bit before we actually get into business case without scoping what's needed and around the other potential funding opportunities. So if I refer to that process, which is an adopted decision-making process, has that been considered when they wanted to move forward the business case terminology?
I'm seeing some shaking heads. I'm not going to answer for them, but you're quite happy where it is. Yeah, they want to move it on.
Okay. Are we doing comment here
Yes.
too, Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
or just questions? Okay.
Could you please stand up?
Yes, it was for a question, but I want to speak on it now too. The it's two things. One, I'm not going to oppose this. I think there's still no harm in moving it forward, but I think there's a very important point around the work that's been done around our process for decision making around these sports facilities. There are some important elements to that stepstone pathway around the preliminary work, let alone going into detailed feasibility as early steps before we start confirming business cases. So I just really wanted to highlight that fact, but otherwise I'm still going to support it. I think the aquatics have yelled out plenty of times for their need, and the indoor multi-sport facilities is obviously a real feature of our city. And we just want to make sure we protect that and also have provision for the growing need for the future. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, before I go back to the mover for right of reply, look, thanks both Councillor Meehan and Councillor Harper. I think getting it on the table, and I think the right LTP is the right place to talk about this in a more serious nature. If we just shove this or kick the can down the road, I suspect we'd be having this conversation in 3 years' time and we won't have moved things along. Prelim feasibility, absolutely agree. Funding opportunities, identification of those, they can actually be done relatively quickly. I think there's enough evidence out there to say that the indoor market or indoor court market for us is in need, and aquatic, certain types of aquatic is in need as well. We need to probably quantify exactly what that means and what the options are. We have a fantastic Lido Aquatic Centre, which has won Pool of the Year just recently, and remember it's nearly 50 years old, or is 50 years old, but it's been very well maintained and looked after. and added on to over the years. But there's an opportunity to look at all options, whether that's improved, whether there's something new, whether there's a partnership with somebody else. So I'm going to support this. I'd even go a step further to do a little bit more, but I'll support the will of the chamber to move this along. So, Councillor Naylor, you've jumped back in. Yep.
I did have a question following the question that Councillor Dennison had. Just with that process that we've just endorsed, around having the preliminary feasibility assessment and the identification of funding opportunities, can I just get a staff comment? If we jump straight to the detailed business case and haven't done those other steps, are we assuming that all that happens at the same time, or are we missing some opportunities of funding opportunities by just jumping straight to the business case? I just think it would be good to have a comment to get some clarity on that.
I checked on that exact matter with the experts just as that discussion was happening. So there are programs in the current LTP for the earlier stages of the process before the business case. Our assumption, or we will still continue to deliver those through the framework which is shown on page 233. So it doesn't mean we jump straight to a business case.
In that case, I've got a question. So if we come to the LTP and we decide we want to push the button on something and it's supported by the community, do we have to go back 2 steps and catch up the long-winded process of feasibility, funding opportunities, and then go to...
I mean, the process is there to inform your decision-making and recommendations.
So those pieces
as
of
a
work
council,
will
you can still choose to make a decision.
Yep, that's what I thought. Yep. So we're basically talking about process. Yeah. Okay. Back to you, Councillor Meehan.
No, I think I'll leave it there. Mr. Mayor, I think it's covered. Thank you.
All right. We will vote. That's exactly how we all feel. Let's pass 15 votes for, none against. Thank you. Okay, we move now to number 10 and actually 10, 11 and 12, which I'm going to get Bryce Hosking, our property manager, up. These are around, I'm going to get him to speak to all 3, around proposals to grant a lease at 5 Andrew Ave to the Scout Association of New Zealand, then on 53 Watergrave Street with the Women's Health Collective, and then on 53 and 55 Totra Road to the Manawatu Archery Club. Again, leases, granting leases as well. Bryce.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yep, definitely appropriate to take these 3 together. I guess just a couple of very brief comments. First of all, they are all seeking approval to do some public notification. They're not awarding the leases in these cases. In respect to the one at 53 Waldegrave, there's actually been an error identified. So the resolution, when it comes up, has actually been amended, but the tenant name, or the official tenant name, will actually be Te Whare Ona Wahine, Palmerston North Women's Centre Incorporated. The chair of that also is the chair of the Women's Health Collective, and inadvertently gave us the wrong name. So wherever it's referred to in that report, please consider it as the Women's Centre. And as I said, that should hopefully be reflected in the resolution when it comes up. And probably my only other comment would be in respect to the Archery Club and the Totra Road one. That one's a little bit different in the fact that council have been given 3 options, I suppose, rather than a recommendation to proceed to the public notification, and that's really as a reflection that I guess there's 2 ways council could consider the Archery Club in this instance. They have been occupying both sites, but they've only had a formal lease for some period over one of them. Council could consider them the incumbent of both, in which case option A, or resolution A, would be most appropriate. In which case we would go out for public notification for them basically as the incumbent of both. Alternatively, if you wanted to follow the support and funding policy to the letter, then you would go for number B. And of course, if you didn't want them at all, then you could go C. However, I suspect that won't be your option that you choose. I'm happy to take any questions.
I'll kick off, Bryce. So the first two seem quite straightforward. And I assumed that the last one was straightforward for the Manawatu Archery Club, having been there. So how long have they been in that role, on that side?
They have been there for quite some time. Apologies, I'll just get my date right. They've been occupying the Scout Hall since 2016, but they have actually been on the site since 2006 in their totality. So they have been there. They are a mainstay, been there a very long time. It's just really that informal part of the process to do with, technically, I guess, where we had a lease to the Scout Hall. That's probably the only reason that separates it out from being any different from any other one of these that we would normally do.
Okay. Right, thank you. I'll open up for questions online. Councillor Hancock.
Yeah, thanks, Mr Mayor, and thanks, Bryce. I've just got one really quick question just in relation to the archery club item. Do we have any understanding of the community demand for that hall space down in that part of Palmerston North? And I'm just really trying to sort of, I suppose, make sure that we've covered off the possibility that if we go for option one, that we don't sort of open up some arguments amongst the community in terms of our process.
Well, I think it's fair to say there is a demand for space in the city. Whether there would be any demand for that site specifically, that hasn't been explored, but I think it is important to note that we do not own the building, so it would only be a land lease. So of course where this gets a little bit complex is if the Scout Hall did not wish to do a deal with anyone else or wanted to take their building away or would not sell it to anyone else, we sort of find ourselves in a bit of a pickle. Where I suppose the benefit of the archery club is they've already done those negotiations. They just can't proceed with the purchase until the lease for the land is confirmed.
And the consultation will probably sort of uncover any unmet demand?
Definitely that is the intention of the consultation process.
Great, thanks Bryce. Helpful.
So before I go to Councillor Wood, so archery are already in there now?
They are. They're occupying both sites, one which is essentially their club rooms, if you will, and the other is actually the archery range itself.
Yeah. So why would we treat them differently to others? Is it because of the unusual?
It's because they're not actually the incumbent, I guess, leaseholder of that building site.
Yeah, but that's only a technicality, isn't it, in terms of who owns the building?
Which is why I say it definitely probably would be appropriate to deem them as the incumbent, but technically council could choose not to.
Yeah, okay. All right, thank you. Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just a couple of questions for you, Bryce. One is, all three of these leases have a proposed 5-year lease term, then with a 5-year right of renewal. Given council the common denominator in this, I presume the 5-year term hasn't been at request of the tenant, it's been at our recommendation, or have all of those tenants independently requested a 5-year term, or have we got some council policy that we only do 5 years?
We are on, well, the Reserves Act gives us a maximum term. Our standard sort of procedure is usually 5 + 5 for these kind of instances. Council has made decisions to deviate away from that in the past, but this is really in line with our standard practice.
Okay, I only asked that because the Scouts state in regard to the first lease here that they've got no intention of leaving the space in the foreseeable future. So I was wondering if there would be any point in offering them 10 years or 15 years, or if it is best we just keep it at 5.
Ultimately, I suppose that's the will of council. My recommendation would be that there isn't really any benefit or negative from deviating away from standard policy.
Okay, and my other question is in terms of the wording we use here. So for the first lease, we propose an annual rent of $50 excluding GST and outgoings. The second one, we have an annual rent of $350 plus GST and outgoings. And then the final one is excluding GST and outgoings. Again, I recognise there's a difference between a land lease and a building lease, but in terms of the three properties, are there any outgoings to recover on either of the land leases? And if so, should we, as a council, include outgoings in the lease to the Scout Hall and the archery sites?
Council has a support and funding policy that it drives, I guess, the rental that we set. There are some outgoings. For instance, they have their own operating expenses that they have to look after. We don't pay for their power or anything like that. And really, it's a reflection of those kind of items. But ultimately, what's been put forward, aside from one saying plus and one saying excluding, which is essentially the same thing, aside from that, we're really in line with our support and funding policy.
Okay, and my final question is in regards to the lease to the women's group on page 386, under the question of what are the estimated costs of operating this service each year. It states see budget. I was just wondering if that budget was provided alongside their report, and if so, have we cited that as Council, or have you cited that?
That's a good point. Look, ultimately, we don't run the facility that they do. We obviously let them use a peppercorn rent to occupy the site. As part of that assessment, we do ask them to provide that details, and they obviously haven't, which is an oversight. If council would like that information, no doubt we could obtain it.
All right, I'm not too worried, but thank you, Bryce. Appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. Just in terms of the Te Whare Ona Wahine at Waldegrave Street, with that one being a building and land, I think the other two are just land, the financial benefit of that in terms of its market, at a market rate, obviously is quite a bit more significant. Is there any accountability that is required, or is the accountability any different to, say, a group that receives a financial benefit through a strategic priority grant? Or is there any accountability required, I guess, is my main question.
So you're asking, are they getting more benefit than someone who would be on a priority grant?
No, I'm not asking that. What I'm acknowledging is that there's a financial benefit, or in-kind benefit, I guess, by having the use of a building, which might be $20,000 or $25,000 a year, I guess, if you were renting it. I don't know, it might be more. I don't know what the value of that is. But it's significant, I guess. If council used that building in another way, it could gain revenue. So in allowing that, I mean, for a peppercorn rent, I guess it is essentially, it could be seen as there's a financial value in allowing them to use the building for nothing. So my question is, in the same way that I'm presuming the groups that get a strategic priority grant have some level of accountability that goes with that. I'm just wondering if that would be the same for a group that gets a benefit such as this. Councillor Bowen's nodding her head. Maybe she knows the answer to this question. I'm not sure if I'm articulating that well, but I'm just saying, is there any accountability given the level of in-kind benefit that the group would gain by the use of the building?
I'll let Julie answer this one.
Mr. Aite. Kia ora koutou. Yes, so yes, the answer is yes. And so you may recall when this policy was reviewed, Council's intention was to make sure that all community support was gathered together in one place and determined by the same policy, so that when an organisation that happened to benefit through a lease, it's sort of treated in the same way and more, as transparently as if an organisation is given a grant.
And
yes.
So just following on from that, the strategic priority grant process is a 3-year process. This is a 5-year process. Is there any issue with that in terms of aligning that with the accountability that goes with that?
Councillor, the policy covers, 18 different kinds of funding and other mechanisms, some of which are determined by government processes, some of which are determined by council funds, some of them are events. So I guess there are lots of different timeframes and processes. This just happens to be the lease part.
Thank you, that's helpful.
Councillor Arnott.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. My question pertains to 53 Waldorf Grove as well. I note that there is a lot of different community groups renting room space off them. Does council have any information of what maintenance costs for that property is per annum?
We do hold quite comprehensive records of those. I don't have them at hand, but it would be easy enough for me to provide exactly how much money we've spent there on a per annum basis.
I'd find it interesting to know that information. Thank you.
Okay, councillors, we'll put up the recommendations. Quite happy to break them down if you want to, but I'd like, in the essence of time, I'm going to try and get them all together. So we've got the proposal to grant a lease at 5 Andrew Ave to the Scout Association New Zealand, resolving that council notify the public of the intention to grant a lease a lease on 5 Andrew Ave, Palmerston North to the Scout Association New Zealand, in accordance with Section 54 of the Reserves Act 1977. That council note that land area affected by the lease to the Scout Association of New Zealand is described as part of Lot 2, DP 52257. The next one is a proposal to grant of 53 Waldegrove Street to Te Whare no Wahine, Palmerston North Women's Centre, and again around resolving to notify the public intention to grant a lease at 53 Watergrove Street, of Palmerston North to Te Whare ni Wahine, Palmerston North Women's Centre Incorporated, and that council note the land area affected by the lease to Te Whare ni Wahine, Palmerston North Women's Centre Incorporated is described as Lot 2 DP 84727. And then finally, proposal to grant a lease on 53A and 55A Totara Road, Palmerston North to the Manawatu Archery Club Incorporated, resolving that council notify the public the intention to grant a lease on both 53A and 55A Totara Road, Palmerston North to the Manawatu Archery Club Incorporated. I'm going to look to move those three. I'll have a seconder, please. Thank you, Deputy Mayor. And look, if I could just speak to them before I go to others that are wishing to speak. I think thank you to Bryce for preparing those memos. And look, leases are always, especially community leases, are always a funny thing. There's a heck of a lot of community goodwill in what those organisations do, and it's part of council's role to provide them with some space, often at a peppercorn rental. And I know for some of the newer members, those peppercorn rentals are quite varied, and I suppose the officers might want to take you through that at some stage and the policies that sit behind those. You can be assured that these all go through quite some rigour with the property team, but also policies are in behind them and the community team are in behind it as well. I think the first two are quite self-explanatory. Just with the archery club, and I think it's really around, this is around creating the least disruption to everybody, treating them as the incumbent, and it gives the highest degree of certainty to them. Remembering they're a voluntary organisation and they are the incumbents, and it is the Scout Association as their preferred option as well, the building owner. So that is where I'm going, and although it doesn't specifically fit our policy, if you do say that they're the incumbent, then it does. Also, if we go to option 2, we will add quite a lot of extra complexity for everybody involved, and may end up with an unforeseen consequence. So, in that case, I do hope that you'll support it, and we can get things moving along. The Deputy Mayor.
Tēnā koe, Mr Mayor. I just wanted to note that I see that with Te Whare o Ngā Wahine, that their lease had expired in June, and since that time they've been operating on a month-by-month lease. I suppose I wanted to flag that for voluntary groups like this, they're under the pump anyway, but it puts them under a great deal of stress to go month by month, and ideally, I would hope that Palmerston North City Council could avoid that kind of thing for all concerned, not just this group, but any other group that might be affected, because a month by month for people who don't have much money is really stressful. Kia ora.
And just may I ask Bryce just to comment why that is? Was it because of the election process and meeting cycles? I'm picking we're normally on top of all of that.
Yeah, so usually these conversations begin well in advance of any kind of lease expiry. It could be any variety of things. Sometimes we're requiring information from the tenant themselves and they don't actually give us the information, so we're unable to proceed any quicker, and that is with voluntary organisations relatively common. So sometimes we do have these kind of things where they've been on a month by month for quite some time, despite our efforts to do so. In this case, it was literally down to the election and the cycle in this case, which is the only reason.
Through you, Mr Mayor, thank you very much.
All right. If there are no other... Councillor Naylor.
Thanks. I'm really happy to support items 10 and 11. In terms of item 12, I had a preference for option 2, which is outlined on page 395, would be the option that would directly align to the process outlined in our support and funding policy. Now that policy has been consulted on and agreed upon, and I think it's important that when we do have policies that we consult our community on and then adopt, that we should follow them. So I would have preferred, if 12 is not supported, I would certainly propose option 2. I think anything that's owned by council is owned by the community and should be routinely open to the community. And whilst if we go through that process, it's highly likely that the archery club will end up back there, I think it's a healthy and appropriate thing to still go through that process if that is what our policy suggests that we should do. So I'd like those three, item 12 separated, if that's okay, and I'll be opposing that one. Thanks.
Yeah. Okay, so we're going to do items 10 and 11 first. Just to write a reply. Look, I agree. We can be policy thick on this, or we can, I think, just following the Deputy Mayor's comments, these are voluntary organisations, and we're pinpricking a little bit with some of the stuff. So they're the incumbents. Anybody that's been a member of a committee or done some voluntary work will understand that this can be quite painful if we're having to go through another, and at the whim of some councillors that they don't really know, stop their lease, can stop their sport or their community organisation. So I encourage you to vote for all three, please. So we'll vote on the first two first. Thanks. And it's passed 14 votes for, none against. All right, we'll go to number 12 and we'll vote on that, please. And that has passed 13 votes for with 1 against. Thank you. Right, we will move now to our last item, which is the council work schedule, and we have a list there with some of the items on there. There's actually quite a lot more that will be coming to those two last meetings. In fact, the next meeting on the 7th has 22 items. So it'll be a big day. With that in mind, I've postponed our workshop for the future of local government. I've asked the staff if they can send you through perhaps some survey material so we can help inform what we want to discuss, and we're looking to postpone that too. And if you just bear with me, I'll find out when we're doing that. To Monday the 19th, that's the only date, from 10 a.m. to 12 p.m, and to entice you, I will put on lunch. Yes. Catered by who? Catered by me. Catered by me. Wade and I will bring in scones. All right. So with that in mind, is there any comments to the work schedule? They're being done. I'm going to look to move it. It's a council resolves, seconded by Councillor Fitzgerald. Do you want to make a comment? Okay. So can you just want to push your button?
Sorry, can somebody explain to me what the council work schedule is?
So the work schedule informs all of council what's coming forward. So you've got a little bit of an idea, a little bit of understanding and scope of the items and reports that are coming up at the next meeting. So for instance, on the 7th, it says we only have the progress and outcomes of an accessibility assessment. I know there's a lot more than that coming. But on the 14th, it addresses a whole lot of other, our annual report. There's a disability reference group are coming to present to us. We've got a night shelter report, those sorts of things. So it's for the newer members, it just tells you what's coming forward, and you've got a little bit of an understanding. This will be populated better and more regularly. It's just, it has taken the organisation a bit of time to get that in place. Yeah, it's an action list, definitely. So look, I'm happy to move that. Thank you, Councillor Fitzgerald, for seconding it. All right. No other comments? We'll look to vote, please. That has passed, 14 votes for and none against. Thank you, councillors. Ngā mihi nui, and have a great evening. Wasn't quite 3 o'clock, but anyway. And thank you to those online. Vaughan, go the Black Sox. First Cuba.
Yeah.
First Cuba.
Yeah, absolutely. Must win game tonight.
Good. Thanks, Vaughan. See you, Pat.